Thanks a bunch, Anubhuti. Thanks for that introduction. So we'll jump right into it. I'm super excited about this conversation, obviously, learning from literally the best in the business. What I'm most curious about is actually my first question. What is a brand custodian, Harish?
So, Bhavna, the simple answer to that is a brand custodian nurtures the brand for the future and also protects the heritage of the brand. The Tata brand is 153 years of age this year. The Tata Group was founded in 1868 by our founder Jamshedji Tata.
Right.
Since then, the brand has had a few very strong pillars to it. One, keeping the community center stage and giving back to the community. Two, being a very pioneering organization which develops and delivers products and services which are relevant to the customers of every age, to the people of every age. And third, of course, excellence in the quality of our products and services. These are three facets of the Tata brand. So, how do you maintain them intact? How do you nurture this brand for the future? How do you ensure that this brand connects with all our target consumer groups? And how do you ensure that the idea of this brand remains intact? Because brands need to have simple ideas to them. The Tata brand has these simple ideas of being community centric, being pioneering, providing very good quality of products and services. How do you ensure that these ideas remain intact for the future? So that, in short, is the role of the brand custodian. It's my job to ensure that this brand emerges into the next generation even stronger and even more vibrant.
Right, right. When you explained that to me, one word really stuck out, and that's that a brand is simple. And I love that. I think as communicators, we add all these complicated bells and whistles because we think that's what people want to hear and that's what they want to see. But actually, the really wonderful thing about the Tata brand and all its brands is that it sticks to these three principles that you've outlined. So, thank you. That sounds like a very interesting job, I have to say.
Yes, Bhavna, indeed, yes, indeed, it's a very interesting job. It keeps me on my toes, but it also, intellectually exerts me. But it's also a wonderful job to do because you are custodian of one of the most iconic brands this country has known.
Absolutely.
And therefore, it has to be handled with a lot of love and a lot of care.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, obviously, I would say it's the fact that you have this wonderful job and you're so deeply immersed in the legacy of the Tatas, of the Tata Group. I guess that's obviously what inspired you to write this book. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a story behind the writing of Tata Stories, Bhavna. This book was written in the first 10 months of the pandemic. So
Oh,
I
wow.
was at home. Yeah, I was at home. Our offices were shut. I had a little more time on my hands because I was saving on travel time. But most importantly, during those 10 months, we all went through ups and downs. There were lockdowns, there were openings, there were lockdowns again. And I could sense that there was a feeling of despondency amongst a lot of people who are facing uncertainty. So I said, why not write these simple, powerful, inspiring stories from the Tata Group, which can actually elevate people and which can actually, provoke you to do something more with your own life, regardless of the challenges and the ambiguities that you're facing. That was at the core of why I wrote Tata Stories. Uh, of course, I did it because I'm inspired by the Tata Group. I worked here for the past 34 years. I know many of these stories and I've grown with many of these stories over my career with the Tata Group. And of course, I did it because I'm passionate about writing. I love writing. And that's the reason, I sat down to write this book. Once a week, I wrote a story. I posted it on LinkedIn, and readers responded to it very warmly with the first few stories seemed to resonate a lot with the readers who read it on LinkedIn, and that encouraged me to write many more stories, which finally I think culminated in these 40 stories that you see in the book.
Yeah. And, I just have to say, so obviously I've read the book. And for me, now that you've given me the backstory of how you started writing the book in the pandemic, I think what I truly liked about this book and I really, really enjoyed it was how it was so inspirational, but not in a cheesy way, in a very relatable way. So you were obviously talking about your company, but in a way that I felt as like a younger person, well, younger, that I could relate to, and I could definitely take back lessons for my workplace, which I don't often find in books that about brands. So I actually thought it was a great read. It was really simple and easy to digest, and just quite inspirational, honestly. So thank you. Good
And,
job.
but thank you, Bhavna. Thank you for those kind and generous words. I'm so happy that you have enjoyed reading this book.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when I wrote it, in fact, the primary target audience that I kept in mind while writing this book was young people like yourselves.
Right.
Because young people in India and elsewhere in the world need to know what makes the Tata Group different from other business groups, and need to know that these are not just stories of a business group. This is not a typical business book.
Yeah.
This is a book, Bhavna, about human beings. It's a book
Yeah.
about the human spirit,
Right.
about challenges, successes, failures, aspirations, achievements. This is a book really about the human spirit. And there are so many wonderful lessons here that we can take out, which can provoke us for our own lives. So I'm so happy that you enjoyed reading this book, and I hope many, many people love reading the stories in this book.
Yeah, and honestly, like you hear about the Tata Group, and there are so many lessons that you learn, and the good work that they do. But when you actually sit and think about how, when they launch each and every business, it is rooted. So how corporate social responsibility is the buzzword, but it's basically the DNA of how they launch businesses, which I thought is so fascinating, because that's really taking it away from just like a communication angle to something that's really ingrained in your DNA. I loved that.
That is absolutely right, Bhavna. That's something that inspires me about the Tata Group, and you'll find shades of that running through most of these stories in Tata stories. Take, for instance, Tata Steel, which was established by our founder, Jamshedji Tata. He did it because he thought the country required a steel plant, a steel industry of its own, and we could not be dependent on other countries for all the steel we need, because India needs to build its roads, its bridges, its homes, and that requires a lot of steel. That's why he established Tata Steel, which was India's first integrated steel plant, getting the best technology from outside, the best technologists from outside as well. Or take the story of the Taj Hotel, which was built in Mumbai. Today, I think one of India's most resplendent icons. The
Right.
Taj Hotel was built because Jamshedji Tata wanted to revitalize the city of Mumbai after the bubonic plague had actually brought the city down to its knees. In the 1890s, there were millions of people who ran away from the city of Mumbai. People fell ill, they died. It was a pandemic much like the one we are going through now. And visitors stopped coming to the city of Mumbai. So Jamshedji Tata said, to get the city back on its feet, we need a new symbol, and a
Right.
new symbol which stands for a new Mumbai. And that's how we came up with the idea of the Taj Hotel. And that is true. The idea of serving the community, but serving it through very sustainable businesses, flows through the Tata Group. It is true of Tata Airlines in 1932. It's true of Tata Motors or Telco in the 1950s. It is true of the Tata Memorial Hospital, which was Asia's first cancer hospital in Mumbai. As much as it is true of Tata Salt or Tata Tea or Tanishq Jewelry or Tata Consultancy Services, you will find the nation building angle and the business angle coming together in many of these stories that I've narrated.
Yeah, it's just, and also just the way it comes through. So it's being proud of your country, while it not being like this jingoistic, like, oh my god, India's the best, but
Yeah.
it's just in a very authentic, real way, like, hey, this country is amazing if we can just harness the energies in the right places. I mean, it's really,
That's
it's really
that,
nice.
that is correct, Bhavna. So these are authentic stories.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
these are real life authentic stories of people who have lived and walked this earth.
Yeah.
They're the stories of their lives, their achievements, their dreams, their failures, their aspirations. So, however, these stories are narrated in a manner that you as a reader can feel the emotion within you, and
Right.
you should be able to see Jamshedji Tata in front of your eyes. You should be able to see JRD Tata in front of your eyes as you read these stories. So they're narrated in a manner that makes it easy for readers to visualize what must have gone on. What went on when Jamshedji Tata and Swami Vivekanand met on a ship? Now, that entire visual of the sea voyage should come in front of your eyes with these two iconic Indians. That's when a story really makes impact, Bhavna. It has to
Absolutely.
bring that picture alive.
Absolutely. And you know, Harish, it's so funny because my generation or the younger generation of communicators put so much importance in authentic storytelling. We talk about it all the time, and we talk about how, we should just be as honest as possible in real life, even when we're talking about our brands. But I think it's really inspirational that you were doing this before we even coined the phrase for it. So it's really good to know. It's good to hear stories about a brand that haven't been polished and messaged into this narrative of what the brand is, but it can be a story about normal people just like you and me going on to try the best that they can possibly do. So I love that narrative.
Yeah. So that is so true, Bhavna. Real life stories where the facts of the story are narrated, but more than just the story, the main protagonist of the story.
Yeah.
Whether it is Lady Meherbai Tata, whether it is Rusi Modi, whether it is Mr. Ratan Tata, or
Yeah.
whether it is JRD Tata or Sumant Mulgaonkar, the main protagonist of the story and what drove him or her to do what they did is the subject of many of these stories. And the stories are told as they are,
Right.
uh, with the raw emotions of the story. Because when I sat down to write these stories, Bhavna, many of these stories made me cry. I had tears in my eyes.
Yeah,
Okay,
totally.
yeah, some of them made me smile,
Yeah.
and some of them, all of them, uh, were awe inspiring to me. So if
Yeah.
I felt that while researching these stories in Tata Stories, I wanted each reader of Tata Stories to also feel that emotion. What's a good movie or what's a good story without emotion in it?
Absolutely.
So I wanted those emotions to come out. And that's what I've tried to do, Bhavna, through all the 200 pages of Tata Stories.
So true, so true. That's such a great point for all of us to remember what is a good story without emotion. So, whenever we're telling stories about who we are and our brands, I think it's like a very, very important point. So, speaking of stories, which one is your favorite?
Okay, so it's difficult to choose, Bhavna. This book has 40 stories in it.
I know.
Okay, but if you push me to the wall and say which is your favorite, I'd actually pick two and then talk about one. There are two stories in this book which are my favorites. One is the story of how Jamshedji Tata met Charles Page Perrin and was able to convince him to come to India. Charles Page Perrin was the best engineer of his kind in the world at that time in the 1890s. And Jamshedji Tata could convince him to come to the jungles of Eastern India all the way from New York.
Right.
That's a favorite story with me, and the way Charles Page Perrin narrates that story, wow, I get goosebumps each time I read it.
Yeah.
But if you ask for an all-time favorite, it's the story of how G.R.D. Tata served as an inspiration for Kalpana Chawla,
Right.
the first ever Indian woman astronaut. And the story of why Kalpana Chawla took into space on her first space mission an old black and white photograph of J.R.D. Tata after having piloted his first flight in 1932. Why would she take such a photograph with her? What inspired her from J.R.D. Tata's life? And, Kalpana Chawla unfortunately passed away in the accident of Challenger at a very young age. And after that, her family sent this old black and white photograph to Mr. Ratan Tata. It's still preserved in our Tata archives. But that story to me, Bhavna, is all about inspiration. I don't want to steal the thunder from my own book. I would prefer that people read the story. But that story of Kalpana Chawla and J.R.D. Tata remains my all-time favorite. Because here was a young Indian girl from Karnal, and inspired by many things, including the achievements of J.R.D. Tata and his career in aviation, She went all the way to the United States, did her further education in aeronautics, joined NASA, and made us all proud by becoming the first Indian woman astronaut to go in space. It just shows us that when there are acts of inspiration, they impact not just the people around you, they impact millions of people. And each of us, Bhavna, has that potential, I think, to inspire people within our roles, to inspire people within our ecosystems and our organizations. If only we move forward boldly, and if only we chase the dreams that we want to chase.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Um, if you had one story that you feel like a person working in brand communications should read first, which one would that be? And before you can steal it out from under me, I'm going to tell you which one I like the most.
Sure.
I love the one with Bobby Kuka. And the reason why I liked it is not because he was obviously a genius, but I liked it because he was so supported by his boss. And I've always felt this, that if you have a boss that lets you take the risks you want to take, you can really achieve so much more. And so that's what I took from the story, and that's why it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that is very true. This is a beautiful story. That before I go to the one story that corporate communicators should read, let me stay on the story that you like best, the Maharaja Man, the story of Bobby Kuka. Now
yeah,
he was a maverick. Okay, he was a genius, a marketing genius, but a maverick. He actually, put in place India's first ever brand mascot, the Maharaja for Air India. But because he was a maverick, Bhavna, he also used to do a lot of other stuff, which people sometimes got upset with. He actually used to, in the words of JRD Tata, he used to play havoc with the whole Tata organization by demolishing the ego and assassinating the character of every Tata director and senior official. And then he went on to do that with MPs and ministers like Mr. Morarji Desai and Mr. Krishna Menon. But JRD Tata still provided him all the support. And, the reason he did that, at his farewell function, he said, I forgive him all the apologies I had to tender on his behalf. I forgive him all the scars that I have borne because of the pleasure, the laughter, and the relief from frustration and boredom that he provided to thousands, perhaps millions of people. So, if you're a boss dealing with a member of your team who has some special skills, but who also has some rough edges, then it is your role as a boss to support that person, to bring out the best in that person. Of course, you have to walk a fine balance, and you have to ensure that whatever is done stays within a boundary. But a supportive boss, I think, is so important for people to grow and flourish and use their talents very well.
yeah,
Uh, your question on what is the one story that every brand communicator should read? I would say it's the first story in this book. The story of how Jamshedji Tata was born, where he was brought up, the Empress Mills, his first industrial enterprise that he started in the 1870s, and why Empress Mills was so special. It was not special just because it was a very profitable mill. Indeed, it was a very profitable textile mill. But it was very special because of the worker welfare initiatives that Jamshedji Tata introduced in that mill. For the first time ever, a provident fund scheme in the country. For the first time ever, a pension scheme in this country. Do you know that more than 100 years back, Empress Mills had a creche for the babies of its working
that's
mothers?
amazing. It's so amazing. We still don't have
Yeah,
crushes
yeah,
today.
yeah.
It's amazing.
So
Yeah.
So when you go back to that story and you see his focus as much on the community and employees as it is on business, then you realize why the Tata Group has grown out of that spirit and grown out of that vision. And the reason I say corporate communicators should read that is each of us as corporate communicators, Bhavna, should know the origins of our brand, should know why we exist. That is very important because what we say should flow from why we exist. And Therefore, I think when you read the story, I hope all of you who are listening to this will go back to your organizations and delve a little deeper into the origin stories of your organization. and why each of our organizations exist, because that would be a wonderful perspective to have when we write anything about the organization in the future. Uh, and that's the reason, Bhavna, that on the cover page of this book, you find the bust of Jamshedji Tata,
Right.
because, and I'll hold it a little closer. And the
Right.
reason is that everything we do in the Tata Group today, and hopefully will do tomorrow and over the next 150 years, flows from the spirit of Jamshedji Tata and his wanting to create an organization where the community was center stage. So that's why I think reading the first story is important.
Absolutely, and it's so true because as as an organization grows, becomes older, more and more people join it. Um, you the newer people have to be reminded of what came before, right? And so that becomes your north star. So actually it did inspire me also to go back and try and figure out, not try and figure out, I'm very clear on why my company was founded, but it's good to just have that in front of you as a way to measure any activity that you're going to do and say, would the person who created this company be proud of it in the way it was created, yeah, intended.
Yeah, that is so true, Bhavna. Much like the Bible or like the Ramayana or the Mahabharata.
Right.
Okay, uh, in our religious lives or in our social lives, serve as that beacon for why something happened thousands of years in the past. I think similarly it's very, very important for the origin story of our organization to be known and communicated not once but time and again. It is the most
Absolutely.
authentic story of your organization, why you were founded. And as corporate communicators, I think we have a role not just to communicate that story, but also to make it relevant to today's generation.
Yeah.
And if the why of the organization is very powerful, believe me, it will be relevant to every succeeding generation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. um, Tell me one story that you wish had made it into the book. It was just edged out that much by some other story. Which one is that?
Oh, you're kind of making me very restless, okay? Because I'll tell you why. Because when I wrote this book, I had a discussion with my publishers, and I engaged with them on how many stories could go into the book.
Right.
I wrote these stories very short, okay? Each story in Tata Stories can be read in 6 minutes. They're short stories, and I think perhaps one of the first few books in the genre of corporate short stories. Um, So my publishers, Penguin Random House, said, the book should be readable in about 3 to 4 hours, because if it's a very thick book, people will place it on their shelf and no one will read it. So eventually, I could put only 40 stories into this book. I had to choose those 40. If I had to choose one story that I would have wanted to narrate, Bhavna, and which is not there, it's the story of Tata Salt. It's such a powerful brand in the country today. One in
Seriously.
two Indian households eat Tata Salt today. It's one of the most trusted brands in the country. Why did the Tatas get into salt? How was iodized salt born? In the days when J.R.D. Tata and Darbari Seth were around, how and why was iodized salt born? How did Tata Salt create this kind of an impact across the country? And there are so many legends and stories of Tata Salt which I wish I could have narrated in this book. Maybe it will be there in my next book. But if there was one story which just missed the 40, I would say it was this one.
Yeah, yeah. And just you telling me about the story just made me realize that actually the Tatas were such strong brand communicators. Is anything from like OK Tata to Desh Ka Namak to the Air India mascot. I mean, they created such enduring either catchphrases or visual references to really, really distinguish their brand from every other brand. So if you could tell us a little bit about that and how that translates to your daily life today.
Yeah. So you're right. I think whether it is Desh Ka Namak, whether it's the Maharaja, who was the first mascot of Air India,
Yeah.
or whether it is, Tata Steel's iconic campaign, "We also make steel,
Yeah.
hum ispat bhi banate hain," or whether it is Tata Tea's Jago Re,
Right.
or whether it's the beautiful campaigns, advertising campaigns you see of Tanishq
Yeah.
or Voltas. on the screen, or whether it is Titan's famous signature tune, which still keeps haunting me each time I hear it.
I know, it's in my head now that ever since I read the story, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And, and did you know that the Titan signature tune, I've narrated that in one of the stories in my book, actually came out of a Mozart symphony.
I did
Uh,
not anticipate that story.
okay. And in a country where very few people actually love Western classical music, Xerxes Desai, who was then the managing director of Titan, and his advertising partners, Ogilvy and Mather, were able to convert Mozart's symphony into a household tune across the country. How cool is that?
It's
And that amazes me.
yeah,
But the reason why I think, Bhavna, the Tata Group produces such powerful brands and powerful marketing campaigns, and like you said, bylines, whether it's Jagore, whether it's Desh Ka Namak, whether it's Hum Ispat Bhi Banate Hai. The reason is, I think, the Tata Group is very connected with India.
yeah,
We are very connected with the. We have been in India for the past 153 years, both through the companies of the Tata Group and through the Tata charitable trusts. I think there's a deep rooted connect with our country. And there's a lot of pride in our country. And I think a combination of those two goes towards creating these iconic leaps of imagination.
yeah.
I would say, and I would give credit to all the wonderful marketers that we have within the Tata Group. I think there is such a vibrant tribe of marketers which flourishes in the Tata Group at any point in time, who are empowered to create these campaigns for their respective brands.
Lovely, lovely. Um, I think to those listening, and obviously there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very inspired by all your revelations today, Harish. What is one thing that you would like the generation of younger communicators to go away with?
So, you know, if there was one thing, Bhavna, that I'd like the generation of younger corporate communicators to go with, it is to ensure that before you tell your story, you clearly understand what your brand stands for. Doesn't matter if you're new to an organization, or doesn't matter if you've been in that organization for a very long time. You have to understand what the core of your brand is, and therefore what are the stories which will most represent your brand
Right.
and best represent your brand. I post on LinkedIn virtually every week. I post both on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I post stories about the Tata Group. And I invite everyone here to read those on LinkedIn and Instagram on my handles as well. But each time I post, I keep in mind, is this story true to why the Tata Group exists or why the Tata brand exists? And does this story express one of the three pillars of the Tata brand, either community or pioneering or excellence? So I think it's very, very important for us to bear in mind what our brand stands for and why our brand exists, because then the stories will flow much simpler, Bhavna. And
Right.
it won't be a very complex landscape. You will know which stories work best for your brand and organization.
Absolutely. So, if there's one thing that I got from today's conversation, Harish, it's clarity, simplicity, and always authenticity. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation. Um, Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhavna. It was a pleasure and privilege talking to you about my new book, Tata Stories. And I invite everyone who's listening on this conversation to pick up a copy of the book. And do let me know if you're inspired, or do let me have your critique of the book as well. Thank
I'm
you
going
very
to
much.
follow you on LinkedIn, Harish, and send you a few messages on one of your next stories. So, I'll see you
Of
there.
course, of course. You're welcome to read my stories both on LinkedIn and Instagram. I would welcome that. And look forward to your comments, Bhavna, when I
Okay.
see them.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.